The chandeliers of the Palmer House hung like suspended constellations, each crystal catching and fracturing the late afternoon sun into 1,000 silver promises. The ballroom smelled of white roses and expensive perfume of polished mahogany, and the tiny, sharp tang of champagne. I had spent the morning rehearsing a smile-practiced patient. The kind of smile that folds around joy and conceals the edges. As Logan's sister, as someone who had watched him carry our family after Mom and Dad were gone, I had a right to be radiant. I wanted to be radiant. The vows, the speeches, the toasts, they all felt like a benediction I'd been rehearsing for years. In my hand, I held a glass that trembled only once when I tipped it toward my lips. Evan was beside me, arm warm at my waist, the kind of man whose presence had once been a warm shore. "Your brother's going to crush it," he murmured into my ear, his voice low, the way only people who share a bed can make their words private in a room full of people. He kissed the hollow beneath my ear in a practiced gesture of affection and pride. He had spent 5 years being gentle on the surface, 5 years of architecture and late nights that smelled of coffee and ink. In the center of his palm, there were blueprints and plans, and the kind of details that convinced strangers he was a good husband. I leaned my head against his shoulder and let the slow, steady thump of his heart push against my temple. Logan walked into the room like a man who had never known fear. He was taller than in the photographs, tuxedo, crisp jaw, resolute. He smiled the way men do when they carry both grief and triumph inside them, a folded map of emotions the rest of us never learned to read. He'd taken on stewardship of Carter Industries in a way that made people nod and sign contracts. Today, watching him stand at the head of the aisle, something inside me uncrumpled as if childhood stitches were tightened by the sight of him in his element. Sophia moved like a painted secret. She was the kind of beautiful that could make a room go quiet, dove-gray eyes that blinked slow, a laugh that was silk, and a diplomacy seasoned for lobby rooms and fundraisers. Everyone said she was made for Logan Smart. Poised, tucked neatly into the life of a Midwestern dynasty, she glided across the floor and took her place under the crystal light. And for a slim, ordinary moment, the world was exactly as it was supposed to be. I'd been meant to stand in the front row and be the embodiment of family grace, to catch the bouquet with an effortless flick of fate and offer the hollow ritual applause. Instead, mid-ceremony, the world broke small and sharp like a dropped glass. Evan had been missing for a while. He told me earlier he would fetch me a photograph of Logan and Sophia before they said I do. But his chair had been empty through 2 speeches, through a saxophonist who played a lament that made people look inward. I told myself he had stepped out for work, for a call maybe. But when the groom's best man began to speak, and the lights dimmed, there was a scooped-out hole in the air where his steadiness should have been. I let the thought sit like a pebble in my shoe, while Logan said the first lines of his vows. After the blessing, I told myself I would find him before the couple left the stage. There was a service corridor that led to a narrow balcony, a place where the ballroom music softened into distant percussion, and the heartbeat of the hotel could be heard in the hush of its floors. It was the kind of place where people walked when they wanted to not be seen. I pushed through a side door into that corridor, and the air hit me cooler. The smell of the city coming up State Street through cracks in the old stone. A laugh slipped through the partly open glass door before I saw them. It was the kind of laugh that belonged in rooms with low lamplights and conspiracies, not in the romance of a wedding. It carried threaded with the murmur of two voices, and then a sound that landed in my chest like a splinter, the intimate, sloppy sound of a kiss. I stopped like a script had run a new line without me. Through the crack in the door, under the gilt of the balcony's rail, I watched the two of them. Evan's hands were at Sophia's waist, her wedding dress pooled around them white and obscene in this small corner of the hotel. They kissed like no one could see them, like the love they made was immune to the public world. Sophia's head tilted. Evan's jaw was rough with urgency. They spoke between kissing low and confident. No one would ever suspect. Sophia said, her voice honeyed with a danger I had never associated with her. You keep everything under control. Evan laughed a sound I did not recognize, stripped of the tenderness I'd loved. My God, he said, this family is such a show. Logan thinks she's sweet. She's nothing but an asset. He used words like assets and leverage as if we were statistics to be parceled out. She gives me a child and we control the board. Carter Industries will be ours. Sophia responded with the clarity of complicity. And then you can take what you want. We'll be untouchable. My breath went thin. The world narrowed to that balcony, that frame of two bodies, and a plan that had been whispered into the dark. It was not infidelity alone that split through me. It was the cold mechanical cruelty of commerce weaponized against love. The variance between the man I'd slept next to for years and the man who stood there became an ocean I could not cross. I let myself slump against the corridor wall to keep from collapsing. My hands were slick with the sweat of fear and something like grief. My chest stuttered. For a moment the hotel sounds fell away, and there was only the rasp of their voices and the ghost of vows being promised in the ballroom below. For 5 years my life had been a house built on trust. The foundations were being dismantled out from under me by the very hands I thought were steady. I stumbled blindly, my cheeks hot with tears I could not allow to fall. I turned and walked until I hit someone. Logan. His face had not changed when he saw me. He simply took me, and the entire world folded into the space between his shoulders. Chloe, he asked, voice small and careful. Something in me gave way, and I told him everything, the kiss, the words, the plans. It came out in a cascade of breathless sentences. I expected anger, violence. I expected the floor to tilt and him to throw down truth like thunder. He listened, and his face did not buckle. He reached out and patted my back like a man soothing a child, and when I had cried myself into a weak, miserable breath, he wiped my tears and smiled at me with an expression I could not read, neither broken nor warm, but full of a terrible kind of calm. Don't cry, he said. You came at the right time. His hands were steady on my shoulders. He asked me to come with him to the groom's waiting room. The carpet there smelled of lemon polish, and the air smelled like proof. We shut the door behind us, and the world became a room with a clock that ticked louder than the music. Logan's voice was level, and it carried a weight I had not known he could muster. He told me he had known. He told me with the same kind of economy he used to run meetings that he had been watching Sophia for months, that she had taken an interest in Carter Industries' energy portfolio, asking about board members and acquisition targets in a way that was not casual, that a private investigator in the city had sent photos Sophia and Evan at rooftop bars downtown at a small hotel in River North hand in hand, in places where they should have been discreet. That Evan had been sending encrypted emails from a burner account. The thing that should have been a relief that Logan had foreknowledge instead felt like a ledger closing. He had been waging war in silence, collecting evidence, not for vengeance, but for an inevitable and precise public reckoning. He said words I had not expected to hear at a time like this. He had turned the wedding into a stage. He had planned to force exposure, the only way that mattered to the people who controlled the world. They wanted to enter publicly with witness and press, and the kind of humiliation that left no shelter. We had 10 minutes. 10 minutes to put on a new performance to become victims before an audience. Logan's plan had the laissez-faire cruelty of a chess player. He looked at me and said, "You'll be our ace. You'll be the broken wife in the front row. We have to make them comfortable. We have to make them arrogant." I thought of everything I had lost in the last 5 years, and then I nodded. It was not bravery, not at first. It was the cold arithmetic of survival, which pain was easier to endure, the private sorrow of knowledge or the public unraveling that would leave predators exposed to keep the entire industry from being swallowed by a corporate spider. I would sit and act the part of a woman who had been oblivious. Logan tucked the photograph of the two of them into his pocket, the one the investigator had taken on that balcony, the exact frame I had just seen. He checked his watch. The ballroom hummed with expectation outside the door. The violinist's note climbed into the air like a held breath. He straightened his tie and, pulling me with a gentleness that made my jaw ache, opened the door. We stepped back into a room full of light and applause. I smiled the smile that had been rehearsed for years and walked back into the lie. If you want to stand with me the moment the world changes and see how we turn a celebration into a reckoning, subscribe and hit the bell. You won't want to miss what comes next, because when the curtain falls, everything we thought we knew will burn. The applause from the ballroom swelled like a tide as Logan and I stepped out of the waiting room. For a split second, the noise felt dissonant, detached from the destruction already rupturing my chest. But this was the world Logan had orchestrated, where celebration and catastrophe would share the same oxygen. The polished marble floor reflected the chandelier light in jagged, fractured pieces. As though the hotel itself could sense what was coming, I felt the dull heat of Evan's gaze before I saw him. He approached with an expression arranged too carefully, as if he'd practiced concern in the mirror. "Where were you?" he whispered with a soft urgency. "I've been looking everywhere." His hand reached for my shoulder, familiar and foreign all at once. I forced my muscles not to flinch. Logan stepped slightly closer to me, an unspoken barrier that made Evan's eyes flicker with something sharp beneath the surface. The master of ceremonies lifted his microphone, and the room responded with a hush that rolled outward like a velvet curtain falling. lights dimmed, narrowing into delicate beams, illuminating the aisle where white rose petals lay arranged in precise symmetry. The photographer adjusted his lens. The pianist rolled into a soft arpeggio. On cue, Sophia appeared at the ballroom entrance, glowing beneath the chandelier's shimmer. If I had not seen her on that balcony, I might have believed she was radiant. Her smile was practiced innocence, her lashes lowered like a woman overcome by emotion. Guests turned their heads, and I watched admiration bloom across their faces like a collective exhale. She floated toward Logan with a grace so polished it bordered on deceit. Her fingers slipped into his when she reached the archway of flowers. Logan's expression was gentle but unreadable, a perfected facade he had chosen for this exact moment. The officiant spoke, but his voice blurred at the edges as the orchestra softened behind him. The ceremony's rhythm pressed on steady and ceremonial, though a cold undercurrent rippled beneath every vow. Sophia repeated her lines perfectly, her tone lifted with sincerity so convincing that even I felt the room sway toward belief. Logan responded with equal poise, but I saw the subtle flicker at the corner of his eyes, a narrower gaze. A tension coiled behind calm. Everything he had told me in the waiting room hovered beneath my skin. The investigators' photographs, the coded emails, the months he'd spent observing the small details that I had been too trusting or too in love to notice. I felt the weight of those truths settling into the hollow behind my ribs, a pressure that built with each ritual gesture executed before hundreds of witnesses. The flower girl approached the stage carrying a velvet cushion with 2 white gold rings. Her small steps were steady, her eyes bright, unaware of the storm bracing itself behind the sparkle of her shoes. The officiant gestured toward the couple, inviting them to exchange vows of permanence and devotion. Then a voice rose from the audience. "One moment, please." It wasn't loud, but it cut through the ceremony like a blade through silk. A ripple of confusion swept across the rows of guests. Heads turned, dresses rustled. The pianist's fingers faltered, dropping the melody like a bead slipping from a string. A woman stepped forward, elegant, poised her hair, pinned neatly under a wide black hat. Her expression was storm-torn, a mixture of grief and fury so raw that it brought the room into a sudden taut silence. An older man followed her, his steps heavy with resignation. Sophia froze, her breath hitched, a single tremor passed through her fingers. "Do you recognize me, Sophia?" The woman asked, her voice tight with betrayal. Sophia blinked once, twice, her face blanching as she took a small step backward. "Mrs. Graham, I didn't expect." "That is clear." The woman snapped, her composure cracking. "You didn't expect I would learn my future daughter-in-law is marrying someone else today." Gasps scattered through the room like dropped pearls. Guests exchanged frantic looks, whispering behind their hands. The officiant stood immobile, clutching his binder like a shield. Mrs. Graham reached into her clutch and pulled out a stack of photographs. They fell from her fingers, scattering across the stage. Images of Sophia wrapped in the arms of another man, smiling, kissing, celebrating an engagement that clearly predated this wedding by years. The crowd erupted. Sophia stumbled, her lips parting in stammered protest. "It's not those were he, and I broke up?" Mrs. Graham scoffed. 3 months ago, you took investment money from my son. You promised him a life. Then you disappeared. And now I find you here." Her voice cracked, wearing a wedding dress. Sophia looked desperately at Logan, but he only tilted his head, regarding her with a serenity so at odds with the growing chaos that she seemed to totter beneath it. The officiant moved as if to intervene, but Logan raised a hand, gentle but commanding. The room obeyed the gesture, falling into a tense quiet. "I believe," Logan said, his voice steady, "there may be more we should address." A murmur rose thick and electric. Sophia inhaled shakily, her fingers gripping the beaded edge of her dress. Behind me, Evan shifted, his breath sharp. He looked toward the exit, calculating distance timing. His jaw tightened the same way it did seconds before a lie. Logan signaled to the technical crew. The 2 massive screens flanking the ballroom flickered. The slideshow of engagement photos and childhood memories vanished. Darkness washed across the screens for a breathless heartbeat. Then a new image took shape. A balcony, a white dress, Evan's hands around Sophia's waist, the kiss, the laughter, the words spoken in that small, secret corner of the hotel. Every detail projected in brutal clarity. The ballroom erupted, shouts, gasps, curses. A woman covered her mouth, eyes wide. A man stood up abruptly, knocking over a glass. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," over and over, as if chanting could undo what they had seen. Sophia pressed a hand to her chest. Her breath rasped, breaking the illusion of perfection she had worn like skin. Evan's face drained of color. He grabbed the back of a chair, steadying himself. He looked at me with something between guilt and panic, but I stared back without expression. "It's edited," he said hoarsely. "It's fake. Someone doctored that." No one believed him. Logan stepped toward the center of the stage. His calm was breathtaking, a quiet force that drew silence like gravity. "This," he said, gesturing toward the screens, "is the truth behind the marriage that was about to take place. But it is not the whole truth." He turned his gaze toward the guests. Not accusatory, not triumphant, but steady, focused, resolute. There was a weight behind his words, the kind that comes only from someone who has lived with a burden long enough to name it. "Infidelity is merely the surface," he continued. "What you have witnessed is part of a deliberate attempt to infiltrate and dismantle my family's company." Sophia Lane and Evan Miles were not acting alone. Evan's breath caught. Sophia swayed minutely. A shiver passed through the ballroom, anticipation, dread, the sense that something much larger than scandal was beginning to unspool. Logan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Black, slim, heavy with consequence. "I have spent months tracing the threads behind this scheme," he said, opening the folder. "And they lead," he paused, letting the moment stretch out, taut and trembling, to someone in this room. The lights dimmed slightly, as though the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in the hollow beneath my throat. I looked at Sophia, her facade cracked, her breath thin. I looked at Evan, panic forming sweat along his hairline. And then I looked at Logan, the brother, who had become steel strategy and sacrifice. He lifted his eyes toward the far end of the ballroom, toward the VIP section where Chicago's wealthiest and most influential sat in stunned silence. And in that single breath, before the next revelation fell, the air tightened around all of us like a drawn bow. The wedding had ended. The reckoning had begun. The ballroom held its breath. Every whisper evaporated. Every fork, every glass, every diamond bracelet seemed suspended in an unseen gravity frozen mid-air. The chandeliers above us flickered in a faint tremor, as if even the lights understood that the next name spoken would redraw the room's entire architecture. Logan closed the black folder in his hands, the sound sharp and final, like the click of a judge's gavel. His eyes swept the audience with a precision I had never seen on him before. Clinical, deliberate, assessing each face like a page in a dossier. Then he looked toward the VIP section. One man sat there half hidden by the shadows of the raised platform. He was almost too still seated, with the posture of someone accustomed to power, but not accustomed to being called upon unexpectedly. His suit was charcoal tailored so precisely it might as well have been carved onto him. His cufflinks glinted a faint insignia, a geometric symbol I had seen only once before, in one of Logan's encrypted documents. Richard Caldwell. The name reverberated in my mind with sudden clarity. Evan had whispered it once on a late-night call, when he thought I was asleep. He'd said it with fear, respect, obedience. Caldwell's gaze rose slowly to meet Logan's. When their eyes locked, it was as if the temperature in the room dropped. His expression didn't shift, not even a blink, but something behind his composure twitched, barely visible beneath the facade. Logan stepped forward. "Mercitsum, Caldwell," he said, voice resonant, and controlled your presence. "Here today is..." Fitting, guests turned to look at the man, confusion rippling through the room. Caldwell merely tilted his head, his face a stone mask built from decades of closed-door decisions. Sophia stared at him in horror. Evan swallowed hard, gripping the back of the chair until his knuckles whitened. "You have orchestrated many acquisitions, many covert takeovers." Logan continued, "Your empire thrives on shadows, but trying to gut my family's company through deceit." He paused. That was ambitious. A murmur swept across the ballroom like a breeze, passing through a forest of disbelief. Caldwell finally spoke. His voice was smooth, polished, untouched by the chaos surrounding him. "I'm afraid I don't know what accusations you believe you've uncovered, Mr. Carter. But I assure you I'm merely a guest." "Of course," Logan said with a faint smile. "A guest who funded Sophia Lane's consulting firm. A guest who sent Evan Miles payments hidden behind a Delaware shell. A guest who promised them board positions after they helped dismantle Carter Industries from within." Sophia shook her head rapidly, voice choking. "I didn't know he never said..." But the images on the screens behind her shifted at Logan's signal. Financial transfers, emails, contract drafts, notes signed with Caldwell's encrypted digital signature. Every secret tether exposed and laid bare under the crystalline glow of the chandeliers. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Evan's voice cracked. "Stop, Logan, you don't understand. I had no choice." "You had choices," Logan cut in. "You simply preferred the ones that fed your ambition." Caldwell rose to his feet at last. The entire room seemed to straighten in reflex, the way civilians instinctively move at the presence of something predatory. He buttoned his jacket slowly. "Whatever personal grievances you have with your fiancé and your brother-in-law, he said calmly, dragging me into your domestic drama is unwise. Logan didn't flinch. Your bid to seize control of Carter Industries began the day my father died under what you called unfortunate circumstances. He paused long enough that the air tightened, the silence brittle. I know the truth now. The room shifted chairs, creaking breaths, catching whispers rising like an approaching storm. Caldwell's expression sharpened at the edges, but he remained composed. That composure, I realized, was not calm. It was arrogance cemented by years of untouchability. You can't possibly prove. But the screens changed again. New documents, new signatures, and then a photograph. A photograph of my mother. Not Catherine, the mother who raised me, but Adrienne Ravenson. Her eyes, my eyes, her necklace, the one I found in the old keepsake box. The one piece of the past that had felt like a heartbeat through time. She stood beside a man whose features were blurred, but his posture, his height, everything in the photograph vibrated with unfinished meaning. Guests leaned in, some stood, some covered their mouths. I felt the floor shift beneath me, the edges of the world tilting like a stage, rotating too quickly. My heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic rhythm I could barely contain. How my voice came out a whisper. Logan, why is she? He looked at me with a pain edged by resolve. Because Caldwell was involved long before today. He's been pulling strings for decades, Chloe, and your birth family was part of the story he tried to erase. My breath thinned, my pulse roared. Caldwell's eyes flicked to me, then cold, calculating, realizing too late that a variable he had once dismissed was now standing in the center of the battlefield. I wasn't just collateral, I was evidence. A tremor broke across Sophia's mask of shock as she whispered almost inaudible, Caldwell. You didn't say anything about her. Evan stepped forward, his voice fraying. Richard, we had an agreement. You told me she wasn't. Caldwell raised a hand, sharply silencing him with the ease of a king silencing a servant. Enough! His veneer cracked for the first time, just enough to reveal steel beneath the silk. This spectacle ends now, he said, turning toward the guests. We're leaving. But Logan moved first. He stepped forward, blocking Caldwell's path, with a quiet composure that radiated authority. You won't be leaving just yet. We have more to show. My throat tightened. Logan, what else? He didn't answer me. Instead, he nodded toward the technician. The screen brightened once more. The ballroom dimmed as the image resolved into clarity. A recording, a dimly lit office, a voice, Richard Caldwell's voice, saying words that emptied the space around me, that pulsed in my ears like a siren buried under water. Take care of the Ravenson problem, all of them. A sound escaped me, a choked inhale I couldn't restrain. Sophia clasped her mouth. Several guests rose from their seats. Someone in the back whispered a prayer. Evan staggered backward as though physically struck. This wasn't part of the deal, this wasn't. But the footage continued. Caldwell's voice again. No survivors, no heirs. The ballroom erupted. Chairs scraped. People shouted. Some cursed. Some cried out in disbelief. A man lunged toward Caldwell, only to be restrained by 2 security guards. The chandeliers trembled above us like panicked stars. Caldwell turned toward me. Slowly, cold, expressionless, studying my face. like a ghost he hadn't expected to see again. "I should have known," he murmured. "You look too much like her." The room roared around us, but every sound muted as my vision tunneled, narrowing to the man who had just admitted he tried to eradicate my family, my past, my existence. Sophia began to sob, her body shaking. Evan wiped a trembling hand across his mouth, eyes wide and unfocused, as if the life he had gambled on was collapsing card by card. "Logan," I whispered, "you knew all of this." His jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "Not everything, not until last week, but I knew enough to prepare." The guests surged forward with questions, shouts, demands. Security rushed in to restore order. Cameras flashed. The orchestra had gone dead silent. The smell of roses seemed suddenly suffocating, too sweet, too deceptively calm. In the center of the chaos stood Caldwell, rigid, furious, but still calculating escape routes behind his eyes. And Logan, immovable, unshaken, ready for the next strike. Then he said the words that cracked open the night completely. "This isn't just a wedding anymore." He turned toward the crowd, voice rising above the storm. "This is the beginning of exposing everything he has built." No one moved. Not a breath, not a sound, just the weight of revelation suspended in the brilliant, shimmering light of a ballroom that had unknowingly become a battleground, and the war at last had stepped out of the shadows. Night had fallen over Manhattan like a velvet curtain, swallowing the skyline in a deep, shimmering blue. From the rooftop of Carter Tower, the city stretched infinitely, thousands of windows, glowing like watchful eyes, each one witnessing a version of the truth happening behind its glass. But the only truth I cared about lay across a gulf of open air. Aurelian Tower, Richard Caldwell's fortress. Its rooftop loomed just 15 feet away, dark, silent, and impenetrable, like the lid of a coffin that had stayed sealed for 25 years. The wind cut across the rooftop sharp enough to sting my cheeks as I stood near the edge beside Logan and David. My pulse thudded so hard it felt like it was echoing through the steel beneath my feet. David knelt, checking the cable launcher one last time. The metal gleamed under the moonlight, clinical and unfeeling. His brow was tightened in concentration, but his hands were steady, the hands of a man who had done dangerous things before and survived them. "You don't have to do this," he murmured without looking up. "I do," I replied. My voice surprised me. It didn't tremble. That room, whatever's inside my mother, lived and died because of it. I need to know why. Logan turned to me then. The city lights cast deep shadows across his face. "Chloe, once we step into that building, we're crossing a line we can't undo. If Caldwell still has anyone loyal inside." "He won't win this time," I said quietly. "He's taken enough." The wind swelled between us, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. David stood and aimed the launcher. A sharp metallic thwip cracked through the night as the cable shot across the gap, a silver arc suspended in air, until it hooked cleanly onto the opposite railing with a solid, echoing clamp. My breath caught. David tugged the cable once hard. It held. Another tug. The steel hummed with tension, but didn't budge. "Secure," he said, "but only just. We cross one at a time, slowly." "I'll go first," Logan said. No, David countered immediately. "If something goes wrong, you're the one they'll recognize. She needs you on the far side." Logan hesitated, jaw flexing. He didn't like being right or being protected. It bruised his pride in ways he never admitted. But he stepped back. David clipped his harness onto the cable and swung his legs over the edge without hesitation. When he released his weight, the cable dipped, tremored, then steadied. He moved hand over hand. Muscles tight beneath his jacket boots skimming air 700 feet above the street. It took less than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. When he reached the other roof, he signaled to us. "My turn." Logan placed a hand on my arm. "Chloe, look at me." I did. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you go back. Understand, I didn't come this far to retreat." His eyes softened with something like grief. Or pride, or both. "You're braver than you should ever have had to be." I didn't answer. I clipped in before I could lose my nerve, and the wind surged as if it sensed weakness. Then I stepped off the roof. Gravity tugged instantly at my body, pulling me downward in a silent threat. My hands locked around the cable fingers burning against the steel. The entire line shivered under my weight, groaning as it stretched. Wind roared in my ears. The street below was a blur of headlights, and honking a distant world where no one knew they were driving beneath a secret. David called out from the far side eyes ahead, "Chloe, don't look down." But I already had. A single misstep would fling me into the void, my life reduced to a streak of motion on a sidewalk no one would remember. I clamped my jaw and pulled myself forward. One hand, then the other, one breath, then the next. My feet scraped air. My muscles trembled under my own weight. My lungs heaved against a rising wall of panic. Halfway across, the wind surged violent and sudden. The cable swung, my grip slipped an inch. Chloe, Logan shouted behind me. David leaned forward on the opposite roof, arms out, as though he could catch me from 30 feet away. My heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted to escape my body. I locked my fingers tighter, skin tearing against the steel. The burn was sharp metallic grounding. I kept moving, hand over hand, inch by inch, until David's fingers finally closed around my wrist, and he pulled me onto the safety of the opposite roof. My knees buckled. I pressed my forehead to the cold concrete, swallowing air. Like something precious. "You did it," David whispered. "You're safe." Not yet, I thought, but I nodded. Logan crossed after us, even faster than David, fueled by adrenaline and fury. Within seconds, the three of us were crouched against the dark rooftop entrance. David knelt beside the door panel, pulling out a compact device from his pocket. "Caldwell updated his security 2 years ago," he murmured. "Biometric redundancies, but no system is perfect." He attached a magnetic override. Lights flickered, the panel buzzed, and with a soft mechanical sigh the lock disengaged. We slipped inside. Aurelian Tower's upper floors were nothing like the polished marble lobbies below. The halls here were narrow and sterile, lit only by dim emergency LEDs that cast angular shadows along the walls. The air was colder, older, still. We moved in silence down a back stairwell that spiraled into darkness. When we reached the floor below the rooftop, David motioned for us to wait while he checked the hallway. After a few seconds, he returned. "Clear, for now." Logan exhaled. "Which room?" David pointed. "Top floor, west side, marked as utility storage 17B. "Of course he'd hide it under something boring," Logan muttered. The hallway stretched long and silent doors lining each side like teeth in a jaw. I felt my skin prickling as we passed under the humming lights. Then a door at the far end, frosted glass, opaque, unassuming, utility storage 17B. But the air around it felt different, heavy, dense, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened inside. David removed a set of slim tools from his jacket. "Give me 10 seconds." The lock clicked after 3. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The room felt untouched by time. Dust coated everything: the desk, the chairs, the bookshelf. Even the carpet held footprints fossilized from another decade. But the air carried something else, too. A silence that hummed with secrets. This was the place where everything ended for my family, and began again in the shadows. We stepped inside, spreading out, each of us searching different corners without needing to speak. Logan went to the desk, rifling through drawers filled with brittle paper and cracked leather folders. David checked the vent covers, the paneling, the underside of cabinets. I drifted toward the wall where a large painting hung crooked as if someone had once torn it down and hastily put it back. A landscape, fractured brushstrokes of a winter field. I touched the frame. Cold. Wrong. I pulled gently. The painting swung open on concealed hinges. Behind it, a recess carved into the wall. Inside, a recorder, old, dust-coated, heavy, its buttons yellowed with age, its reels frozen mid-turn like a breath held too long. A chill crawled up my spine. "Logan," I whispered. "David, I found something." They reached me within seconds. David's eyes widened. "God, after all these years." Logan reached out, hesitating before lifting it from the wall, as though touching something sacred and poisoned at once. Then from the hallway, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, too close. David killed the flashlight instantly. We froze. 2 shadows passed under the door's crack, stretching across the dusty carpet. A voice murmured, "Boss wants this floor swept again. He thinks someone's been poking around." Another answered, "This place gives me the creeps." Their doorknob rattled once, twice. My breath locked in my chest. Then footsteps faded, gradually, slowly, but not far. We waited until silence finally settled again, thick and absolute. David leaned in very close. "We're not alone up here anymore. We need to leave. Now. Not without everything Logan said." Gripping the recorder. "Everything," I echoed. He nodded toward a bookcase. "Your mother's clues didn't end with the letters," he whispered. "There's more here. I'm sure of it." As if responding to his belief, my eyes fell on one shelf. Slanted, uneven, one book thicker than the rest, its spine cracked, its title faded, "Justice and Truth." My pulse quickened. I pulled it free. It was hollow. Inside, wrapped in aged leather, a notebook. Logan's breath caught. David's eyes widened. These pages had traveled through fire and betrayal, and decades of silence to reach us. The footsteps returned. Running this time. Someone shouted, "Check storage 17B." David grabbed my arm. "Go, now." We ran. The recorder, the notebook, the truth, all of it thumped against my chest as we bolted into the darkness, chased by the ghosts of a past that was suddenly, violently awake. The world outside the sealed room erupted into chaos. Boots pounded against the polished concrete floors, echoing down the corridor like thunder rolling through metal canyons. Voices' sharp, urgent barking orders ricocheted around us as we fled into the shadows. The stolen recorder clutched tight against my chest, and the leather-bound notebook pressed to Logan's side. David led the way, his movements crisp, controlled every gesture, sharpened by the instinct of a man who had lived too long at the edge of danger. He signaled for us to take the narrow service hall, branching off the main corridor. We ducked inside just as a patrol of security guards sprinted past the intersection we'd vacated seconds earlier. "Keep moving," David whispered, his voice barely audible, over the hum of the building's ventilation system. The service hall was dimly lit by small emergency bulbs glowing red behind protective cages, casting distorted shadows along the pipes above us. My heart hammered so violently I could feel it in my throat. The weight of everything we'd stolen, everything we had learned, pressed down on my ribs until each breath tasted metallic. A recorder containing Caldwell's voice ordering the murder of my family. A notebook belonging to my biological father. A truth that had been buried deeper than the foundation of Aurelian Tower. We reached another stairwell, a rusted metal door that creaked too loudly when David pried it open. He winced but ushered us inside. The stairwell spiraled downward like the interior of an abandoned ship, cold air rising from the depths. 2 floors down, he murmured. "There's another maintenance access point. Less security." We descended quickly, the metal grate groaning under our feet. The sounds of the guards above grew faint, replaced by the hum of old wiring vibrating through the walls. Somewhere on the landing below, a fluorescent bulb flickered, buzzing like an electric wasp. When we reached the bottom, David stopped. "Shit," he whispered. The door we expected to find, marked as sublevel access, was locked from the outside with a heavy mechanical deadbolt. Not electronic, old-fashioned, industrial. "Can you pick it?" Logan asked quietly. "Not fast enough," David said. "This thing is meant to survive a blackout. Or a break-in." Footsteps sounded above us, several sets, moving fast. "They're sweeping floor by floor," Logan muttered. "We're running out of time." My pulse surged, thudding against my temples. The stairwell felt smaller, the air tighter, the shadows deeper. We were cornered, trapped between concrete and steel, and the ghosts of a murder that had shaped my entire life without my knowledge. Then I remembered something. "The vent," I whispered. On the other side of the room, there was a ventilation window. What if this level has the same layout? Both men froze. Then David looked up at the wall opposite the locked door. A small square vent, screwed shut, high above the floor. He exhaled. "If it lines up with the building's perimeter, it could lead to an exterior maintenance ledge." "It's our only option," Logan said. He crouched, interlocking his fingers. "Chloe, up." I stepped into his hands, my palms sweating despite the cold air, and hoisted myself upward until I reached the vent grate. My fingers trembled as I worked the screws loose, one by one, each metallic twist echoing in the silent stairwell. Below, the footsteps grew louder. Closer, voices spilled down the stairwell. "Check lower levels." They couldn't have gone far. "Boss wants this whole tower locked down now." I wrenched the last screw free. The metal cover dropped, and Logan caught it before it clattered. A gust of icy wind burst through the opening. Outside, freedom and a 30-story drop below. "Go," David urged. "You first, Chloe. You're the smallest." I slid into the vent body, twisting painfully through the narrow opening. The cold hit me instantly, biting into my skin. There was barely enough ledge for the tips of my boots to find balance. Below me, nothing but air stretching down to the street, in a dizzying blur of headlights and honking horns. I swallowed hard, then reached back through the opening and grabbed the recorder and notebook as Logan passed them to me. David climbed out next, then Logan. The three of us clung to the ledge like insects to the edge of a glass tower, the wind clawing at our clothes, threatening to peel us away from the building's face. We shuffled sideways, inch by inch, hugging the cold concrete. Inside, the stairwell door burst open. Flashlights slashed through the darkness. "They're not here, keep looking." We froze, held our breath. The guards remained inside. For now. David motioned for us to continue. The exterior maintenance balcony, just 30 feet away, gleamed under the moonlight like a promise. Or a dare. The wind roared harder the farther we moved along the ledge. At one point, Logan's foot slipped on a wet patch, and he lurched. My heart dropped, but he caught himself with a strangled breath, fingers scraping against the wall. "Don't stop," he muttered. "Just go." When my hand finally touched the cold railing of the maintenance balcony, I almost sobbed with relief. David helped me over the edge, then pulled Logan across. For a moment, the three of us stood there, panting, shaking alive. A siren sounded somewhere inside the tower. David looked up sharply. "That's a building-wide lockdown. They know something happened. We need to get back to Carter Tower now." The cable was still stretched taut between the rooftops, gleaming under the moonlight, like a silver lifeline. But the moment we climbed back up to the roof of Aurelian Tower, I felt something shift inside me, a feeling, a certainty, that nothing would ever be the same after tonight. We crossed the cable in silence, one by one, the recorder and notebook strapped tight to my body. Like organs I suddenly couldn't live without. When my boots hit the familiar surface of Carter Tower, again Logan stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. For a long moment, I let myself sink into the warmth of that embrace. Not romantic, not fragile, human, necessary. David gave us space before speaking. "We need to go now, before they trace anything back to us." We hurried into a concealed stairwell leading to a secured executive floor. The elevator would be too risky. Cameras we couldn't disable might catch our faces. The stairwell at least belonged to Logan's building. Once inside his private office with the door locked and soundproof glass sealing us off from the world. Logan set the notebook on the table with reverence. He didn't open it, neither did I. We stood there in silence, grief and anticipation, twisting together inside that room like two vines fighting for air. When I finally sat down, my hands hovered over the leather cover. The texture was worn smooth by a man I had never met, but whose blood flowed in my veins. My father, the man whose life had been stolen by Caldwell's greed. I felt the ache of years I'd never known, a phantom pain for memories that had never existed. David switched on his UV light. The room darkened. My breath caught. Words hidden under invisible ink began to bloom across the pages like ghosts stepping into the world. Dates, names, financial trails, warnings, fears. A final entry written with a trembling hand. If you are reading this, it means I did not survive. Everything you need to expose him is in the safe deposit box. I trust Catherine to protect our children. Forgive me. I did everything for you. My eyes blurred, not with grief, with clarity. Everything suddenly clicked into place, the missing pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Logan's voice trembled as he whispered, "This will destroy Caldwell." David added, "More than destroy him. It will bury him." But that wasn't what filled my mind. It wasn't vengeance. It was a memory I didn't have. A mother leaving to save her children. A father writing his last words in the dark. My hands closed around the notebook, pulling it to my chest, as though I could breathe life back into the man who wrote it. And in that moment, in Logan's silent office, high above Manhattan, I made a promise I would finish what my father started. Even if it meant confronting the darkest man still breathing inside this city. Even if it meant carrying the truth into fire. Because the past was no longer buried, it was awake. And it was demanding to be heard. Dawn crept into Manhattan with a muted glow, the kind that softened skyscraper edges and poured gold into window panes. But inside the high-rise auditorium of Aurelian Holdings, the site of their annual shareholders' meeting, nothing felt soft. Nothing felt warm. The air vibrated with tension. Suits filled the rows like a field of identical soldiers, murmuring, shifting, restless. A stage gleamed under sterile white lights, its polished floor reflecting the towering LED screens behind it. A modern coliseum prepared for something far greater than quarterly numbers. Logan stood beside me near a back entrance hidden from view behind a velvet curtain. He wore a charcoal suit that sharpened every angle of him. But his eyes were fixed on me, searching, anchoring, ready, he whispered. I wasn't sure anyone could be ready for what we were about to do. But I nodded. Yes. David approached us with two other officers. Trusted ones who had helped secure the warrants, who had reviewed the evidence from Switzerland, who had listened to the recordings of Richard Caldwell's voice, without flinching. He handed me a slim microphone. When Logan gives the signal, he murmured, "Walk straight onto the aisle. Lights will shift to you automatically." "And Caldwell?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "He'll already know he's cornered," Logan added, "but he won't understand how badly." The room buzzed as shareholders settled into seats. Reporters adjusted their cameras, assistants hurried along the aisles, and then Richard Caldwell appeared. He walked on stage with an ease that made my skin crawl. The man looked like a king surveying his kingdom. Immaculate suit, silver cufflinks expression. Carved from decades of control. Flashbulbs popped. Applause rose. He smiled confident, sharp, utterly unaware that the empire beneath him had already been cracked open by the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth as lacquer. "Thank you for joining me today. Aurelian Holdings stands at the cusp of a new era." His speech projected across the room, filling every corner with his practiced bravado. But my pulse wasn't listening. It pounded so violently, I thought the entire auditorium could hear it. Every memory of the past weeks of the rooftop. Wines, the hidden room, the notebook, ink blooming under ultraviolet light, throbbed in my chest. My father's handwriting, his fear, his love, his final plea for justice. My mother's letters, her disappearance, her sacrifice, it all led here. Logan touched my hand briefly. "When this is over," he murmured, "nothing that hurt. You will hold power any more." I didn't answer. I stepped forward. On stage, Caldwell continued, and our future remains secure under my leadership. He didn't get to finish. The auditorium doors burst open. Richard Caldwell David's voice cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned as he strode down the central aisle in full uniform, flanked by 2 officers. His presence was electric, unyielding, authoritative. Caldwell froze. Reporters shot to their feet. Gasps erupted everywhere. "What is this?" Caldwell demanded, voice hardening. "You can't interrupt this meeting. You are under criminal investigation," David projected. The room erupted into shouted questions. Caldwell's mask of composure fractured. Anger, real visceral, spiked through his expression. "This is absurd." On what grounds? Logan stepped onto the stage. The audience roared with murmurs. On the grounds, Logan replied evenly, that you murdered the Ravenson family 25 years ago, and that you attempted to destroy mine. Caldwell's face went white. "This is a deeply irresponsible accusation," he snarled. "You have no evidence, don't you?" Logan said. He lifted his hand, and the screens behind them exploded to life. Not with stock charts, not with financial projections, with recordings. Static crackled, then a familiar voice filled the room. Caldwell's voice. "The old man has found out everything. We can't leave him alive." Gasps shot through the auditorium. Shareholders stumbled back. Reporters fumbled for microphones. Another sentence followed: "No survivors, no heirs." The audio shook the room like thunder rolling across steel. Caldwell staggered backward as though the words had hit him physically. "That recording is fabricated." "And this," Logan said. The next images flickered onto the screen, scanned documents. Contracts, bank transfers, offshore accounts, handwritten signatures. Dates aligning with the Ravenson tragedy. And then the notebook. My father's last entry projected across a 30-foot screen. "If you are reading this, it means I did not survive. Everything you need to expose him is in the safe deposit box. I trust Catherine to protect our children." The auditorium fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. My cue. I stepped out from behind the curtain. Light crashed onto me, blinding hot absolute. 100 faces turned. Caldwell's breath caught. For the first time, his expression twisted into something raw. "You," he whispered. "You shouldn't exist." His words sliced through the silence. Logan moved toward me, standing at my side. His presence was a shield, quiet but unbreakable. I lifted the microphone. "My name is Chloe Ravenson," I said, "daughter of Adrian and James Ravenson." Whispers rippled like wind through dry leaves. "And I am alive," I continued, voice steady. "Alive because my mother ran from the man who ordered her death. The same man who sits on this stage." Caldwell exploded. "This is a lie, all of it." David stepped forward with a warrant. "Richard Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, unlawful acquisition, and the murders of James and Adrian Ravenson, along with the attempted elimination of their heirs." The room erupted. Security guards tried to rush the stage, but Logan's legal team and David's officers blocked them. Caldwell lunged fury, distorting every line of his face. "You ruined everything," he hissed at me. "Your family should have." Logan seized his shoulder, shoving him back, as officers grabbed his arms. "It ends today," Logan said quietly. Caldwell struggled until exhaustion overtook rage, and then he sagged, an empire crumbling in human form. As they dragged him out beneath the blaze of camera flashes, something inside me loosened. Not triumph, not relief, something deeper, something hollowed by years of unknowingly carrying ghosts. When the doors closed behind him, silence washed through the auditorium. Then applause. Not polite, not formal, a tidal wave. People stood, reporters cried. Shareholders cheered for the fall of the tyrant who had ruled them in shadows. But I couldn't move. Tears spilled silently down my cheeks, not for Caldwell, but for the family I never knew, for the father whose handwriting had led me here, for the mother who had walked into darkness so I could someday step into the light. Logan wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against him. As the applause surged, "It's over," he murmured. But it wasn't, not really. Victories don't erase wounds, they close them. Slowly, tenderly, painfully, days passed, weeks. Caldwell's trial consumed national headlines. The evidence from the Swiss vault sealed the case. He received multiple life sentences. His network collapsed. David was promoted. Logan rebuilt Carter Industries without fear. And I traveled to France, to a quiet hilltop cemetery, bathed in lavender light, where I finally stood at my mother's grave. Adrienne Ravenson, beloved, brave, missed. I placed white roses on the stone. My hands trembled, my breath broke. "Thank you," I whispered, "for choosing my life over your own." Wind brushed across my cheek, warm, gentle, like a hand that had waited years to touch me. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it. Later, when I returned to New York, a new chapter unfolded quietly, almost tenderly. The trauma softened, the nightmares faded, the future no longer felt like something that could be stolen. One evening, as the city glowed beneath our apartment balcony, Logan stood beside me, his hand brushing mine. "You know," he said softly, "your story didn't start with tragedy. It started with love. Immense, impossible love." My breath hitched, but didn't break. "And now," I whispered. He turned to me, eyes warm, steady. "Now it can start again." The city stretched out before us, endless, luminous, alive. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, toward the light.